our title today, Don?
Our title is how to stay out of court. How's that sound?
That sounds good.
And I got my live stream questions up, and we should be about live pretty soon.
All right, we're about ready.
You're right.
And it's Monday, 1 o'clock. Welcome. Laissez le bon temps rouler, which is my way of saying, I hope you have a great Mardi Gras tomorrow. Eat lots of punchkis. I hear they're non-fattening, so I think you'll be okay. And have a little fun tomorrow. Right now, today, we got a lot of folks planning vacations, being on vacation, ever since the first of the year. And one of the things I want to remind everyone is to make sure you have backup, qualified backup who can write an offer or a counter offer for you when you're away. We have a situation going on right now where one of our agents is not in town and doesn't have another agent backing up the business who is qualified to construct language in a counteroffer. So they're kind of turning to me, and I mean my time is a little bit limited for that sort of thing. So make sure when you leave town that you have backup for your business. That's really important. I don't care if you're going, to Omaha or you're going to Cancun or you're going halfway around the world. You have to have somebody who's handling your business here locally. We're also running into a lot of things which I'm going to talk, I think I'm going to repeat myself a little bit here, but it's important because these things are still happening a lot. And it's called how to get on, how to stay out of court. And when you write a contract, one of the things that agents do is they forget to fill in all the blanks. That's number one. Don't leave any blanks, because then it leaves it open to interpretation. And in fact, it can even cause that contract to be unenforceable. So make sure that you fill in all the blanks with dates and times and all of those kinds of things. It's particularly important when you get into the contract and you're dealing with issues such as possession, for example, or closing, that you have very specific deadlines and consequences if those deadlines are not met. For example, what happens when you write into a contract the buyer will be permitted a walkthrough the morning of the closing? Well, okay, go ahead. Have at it. Enjoy yourself. Let me know how it goes. But there's no consequences. It doesn't tell anyone that the buyer has the right to walk away from the deal if he walks into the house and it's trashed. So be certain that if you're going to have consequences, or that if you're going to put language in the contract that implies consequences, that you actually spell those consequences out. Today, for example, I looked at a contract an addendum that basically gave the buyer an unending ability to continue trying to purchase a home that is listed by one of our agents, but there was no end date on it. It was just, it could go on and on and on till I said, well, this could go on till October, couldn't it? And it's true, because there was no end date, there was no date that they say in the contract, okay, we're going to do it to this far, and then the deal's going to be dead. I know that we all like to keep deals together, but sometimes that's not possible. So you have to be very, very specific. Another area that we want to be specific in is issues of possession. We're running into a lot of situations where agents are telling me that either the sellers won't get out, or that there is actually a tenant in the property that the listing agent didn't tell them about. Well, tenants have rights. Tenants may have a lease. We don't know. What we do know is that we found out days prior to closing that this tenant was in the property. We don't know how long they're going to be in the property, but the language of the purchase agreement, which says possession at close, isn't going to happen. And once they close on that property, it becomes the buyer's problem to evict that tenant. And again, we don't know what agreement has been reached. We didn't even know whether or not there was a security deposit in place so that when that tenant moved out, that the new buyer would have the money to give to that tenant if they left it in good condition. So all of these things are really, really important. Recently we had a situation where a buyer was unaware that there was a private road agreement, which cost each person on that private road $35 a month. And after they closed, they said, well, that's like $400 a year. We didn't know anything about that. Well, why didn't you know anything about it? Well, because nobody told us. It was in the title work. It was in the Schedule B, but nobody had read the Schedule B to the buyer. And as a result, the buyer went to the closing completely unaware that their monthly payment was actually $35 a month higher than they thought it was going to be, which in some cases can be a deal breaker for people. So these are ways to stay out of court by digging down and understanding what's in the title work, understanding where the boundaries are in terms of the survey, where the easements are, where the utility easements are. All of these things are issues that come up virtually every week on my desk. So I caution. Another thing that we're seeing is houses that have been not winterized, or winterized and then unwinterized but not re-winterized. And so we've got houses out there that they're turning the water on and the pipes are breaking. Well, we're going to see more of that. We've had a tough winter. We've had a deep freeze. The thaw line is very deep. And so I would caution you that if you have a listing and the homeowners are not living in that house, that you make sure that that homeowner has somebody who is monitoring that property and who has winterized the property and is going over to check on the property regularly to make sure that nobody has de-winterized the property and left it to freeze. We're not in the business of being property maintenance people. That shouldn't be our job. It should be the seller's responsibility. But if it's not being done, if by anyone, then we're going to have places that pipes are freezing and spraying water everywhere. So again, I caution you that if you have those situations out there, don't take them lightly. You've got to find out, you've got to dig down and understand who's maintaining the property while the seller is away, if it's not being lived in, so that we can prevent accidents like this going on. Another caution I have is regarding deadlines and rescinding contracts. We had a situation recently where there was a counteroffer put out there by the seller. They received an offer from the buyer, and they countered the offer. A few days went past, and the buyer never accepted the offer. And in the meanwhile, the seller got a new offer that was quite good. And so the call came to me, what do I do? And I said, you have to let that first buyer, send them an email saying that you are rescinding that counteroffer, that you have to terminate that counteroffer before you can accept the other offer. Or what might happen is that that buyer could sign that counteroffer at just the moment before the second offer is signed, and your seller ultimately sells their house twice, which creates problems. So I would just caution that you be careful of that. Earnest money deposits. Again, we just covered last week a change in the West Michigan Purchase Agreement, and I continue to get calls saying, you know, what do we do? The deal's falling apart. How do I get the earnest money back to the buyer? Well, that's not our job. We can facilitate that by offering them to sign a mutual release. Sometimes it's not in the best interests of the buyer or seller to sign a mutual release. If they feel as though they've been caused more damage than the earnest deposit covers, then they have every right to not sign the mutual release and settle a matter in court because they've experienced damage that goes beyond the earnest deposit. We can't enforce contracts. That's not what we do. We don't have police powers. Only the courts have the ability to enforce a contract. And so when I say to people, you have to call the lawyer, you have to get an attorney involved, it's because we can't be attorneys and we can't argue a case in court. And we can't play lawyer. It's as simple as that. Any questions today? I know that it's we're kind of flying blind here, but we'll take any questions you got. Trying to think of other situations that we've had that are always fun. I will say we had an exciting one last week, which was we rescued some dogs. And again, thanks to Joanna Lasser and Kim Baker and Brian Cribbs for jumping in and getting the job done. Some starving pups. They did an awesome job. And the pups are getting, they're gaining weight. They're putting on weight. The older one is Ace, and Ace is, he's coming along slowly, but he seems to be getting better. And then the younger one is Dexter. I think that's how it goes. And Dexter looks like he's pretty bouncy and ready to go out and play, but he's still pretty skinny. He needs to put a little bit of weight on him. So, again, if you walk into a house or discover that there are animals or children or people being abused, if there is a law being broken, our agency responsibilities of confidentiality do not preclude us from reporting a crime. And we have a civic responsibility to do that when we see it. So this was a situation where there was clearly abuse going on. The dogs were not being fed. And one of our agents got a bunch of us involved, actually. And we got the Muskegon deputy or detective or somebody involved, and we got the dogs. So I mean, hats off to the people who had the courage to say, you know what, we're going to stop this right now, and they did. But the same holds true that if you have a situation where you walk into a property and you find an elderly person being abused or neglected. I had a situation I mentioned many years ago where we walked in on a Tuesday morning tour back when they did those, and there were two small toddlers who were shivering. Their skin was, bluish, grayish, cold, and they were clearly they were in diapers, and that's all in the dead of winter, and it wasn't very warm in the house. And we called Child Protective Services because they were not getting the care that they needed, and CPS was there pretty quickly. By the same token, I mentioned the situation that I had with a dog who was chained outside during the winter. If you see a law being broken, you have an obligation to report it. Not that we're out there wanting to play, policemen. Once we get the police involved, let them handle it. Let them do their jobs. And I think that, again, I commend those who got involved, and now the police are conducting an investigation, and we can step back from that. Again, any questions? Not seeing any. So what are your plans for Mardi Gras? Anything wild, crazy? Punchkis? Who's got the best punchkis? We'll start that for a survey. You can just put it in the live stream. Who's got the best punchkis? I'm just going to sit here for a bit, see if we have any questions coming in. How many do we have online?
16.
16. All right. There's 16 of you out there. I want to hear from you. Oh, I know. There was another thing about EMDs. Somebody was asking me about EMDs and whether or not, if there was one party wanted to break the contract, to terminate the contract, was there liability beyond the EMD? And the answer is yes. Just because you've got 500 or 1,000 or 2,000 or 5,000, 10,000 in an earnest money deposit doesn't mean that if you bail out of a contract right before a closing without the ability to do that according to the contract, you could be putting your client at risk of the other party suing them for damages. I had a situation where a seller refused to close, and so the buyers went down to the Amway Grand Hotel, got the finest room in the place, ate dinner at all of the hotel's restaurants for about 30 days, racked up a several $1,000 bill, and eventually, as the sellers realized that they were going to potentially be on the hook for it, they finally got smart and said, okay, I guess we'll close. Same holds true of a buyer who fails to close, that a seller does have the right to pursue damages beyond what is contained in the earnest deposit. So this is one of the reasons that I always encourage agents to get big earnest deposits. The bigger the better. It benefits really both parties to make sure that both of them keep their heads in the deal to get to a closing. I see Penny has a question. Can we pull up a question posted by Lana in an earlier posting? Let me see if I can pull it up. No. Oh, wait a minute. Let's see here. Maybe I have it. Okay. Lana Sinclair had a question. Spoke with an agent from another brokerage who complained that BAs and recent showings of her listings. Buyers make appointments but are not honest when asked if they are working with another agent or have a buyer agency contract with someone. She said there seems to be a trend that BAs who are too busy, they don't want to come up north or even across town. Trust me, it happens here too. And so they make an appointment with the listing agent, and the buyer wants to put in an offer. The BA essentially steps in, and if the property is shown to a buyer by the listing agent, then the commission shall be 25% referral fee. Well, I don't think that's the right thing to do. And she says, wouldn't it have to be in the listing contract? Yes, it would have to. First of all, yes, I think it would have to be in the listing contract, and it would have to be something that the multiple listing rules would allow. I don't think that the multiple listing rules would allow this. That being said, a buyer's agent is the one, a listing agent, under those circumstances, could be considered procuring cause. If they are the ones who show the property to the buyer, regardless of whether that buyer has a buyer's agency contract signed with another agent, that listing agent could claim that they were the procuring cause of the sale, and they're entitled to the entire thing, whether that buyer's agent writes an offer or not, unless the buyer's agent has actually shown them the property. So you're getting into the question that you have here is whether or not we cannot enforce a buyer's agency contract against a listing agent. We have absolutely no enforcement power whatsoever. We can't enforce a buyer's agency contract when somebody goes off and hires a second buyer's agent. The only person that we have a contract with in a buyer's agency agreement is the buyer themselves. The only option we have is to sue the buyer for the commission that they did not allow us to participate in. So I hope that answers your question, but if it doesn't, please let me know. Shoot me back, fire me back a question here, and we'll get it real quick. It's a good question, by the way, thanks. But we run into that a lot, that agents, the buyers claim that they don't understand that they signed a listing contract or a buyer's agency contract. They may have felt as though it was one of a bunch of papers that was slipped in front of them while they were signing an offer. I caution agents against doing that. If you're going to create a buyer's agency relationship, it really needs to stand on its own, and the buyer needs to understand what the consequences are. Again, consequences. They need to understand the consequences if they break the contract that you have with them, that you're going to sue them. It's as simple as that. You're going to sue them for the commission that you're entitled to. So, again, we don't have any claim against anyone, listing agent or another buyer's agent, if our buyer goes rogue and writes an offer with somebody else. So, Lana says thanks, and you're welcome. So, we're at about 1:25, and again, I wish you a great Mardi Gras for tomorrow. Have some punchkis and maybe a cold beverage. That sounds good. And tune in again next week. Oh, wait a minute. Chuck says, hang on, Chuck, let me scroll down. What is the wording we would put on a listing protecting the seller in the case that the property they are working to purchase becomes unavailable? Oh, I think I got it. Okay, sorry, it took me a little bit. It's about what you have here, actually, which is the seller reserves the right to terminate the offer in the event property that the seller is purchasing is removed from the market or is no longer available. It's really pretty close to what you have here. So if you have a seller, you have a listing, and they want to buy another house, and that house gets sold while they're attempting to sell theirs, and they say, that's the only house I wanted, I want to take my house off the market. You can put that language in the listing contract that says seller's home to be removed from the market if the home seller is purchasing becomes unavailable. Hope that answers that question. And I think we're going to call it there. So again, thanks for joining. If you have questions, for those of you who watch it later, add your questions. We'll answer them today, tomorrow, when we get a chance. Okay?